It's going to be a little bit of a different Lunch with Haley for you today. As I said, hosting the podcast here this year, we partnered with a local production partner and have been really elevating the look and feel of the show. And when the marketing team said, hey, do you want to sit down for the last episode of Lunch with Haley and bring some of your biggest lessons and takeaways from the show to Lunch with Haley? I said, yeah, but if we're going to do it, we got to do it from the studio. So for the next, let's call it hour, it's going to be me talking about some of the best conversations that I've had throughout the year without slides. I have a little bit of a rough roadmap in front of me, and Magezi or somebody from our team here is going to drop those slides into the chat for you. If you want to follow along, you can also get them at lunchwithhaley.com. I know that link off the top of my head. You could follow along that way. I was getting ready for today's conversation, and as I always do, I sit and I usually work. I have some sort of either Amazon Music playing or YouTube playing, and Parker McCollum came on. And I don't know if you're a country fan or not, but Parker McCollum is somebody that I really like. I've seen him now 3 times, and specifically, his song Hell of a Year came on. And when I think about the year in staffing and recruiting and the year that was 2025, I think Hell of a Year is a fantastic way to summarize it. You know, I have the fortunate opportunity of talking to anywhere from 10 to 15 different clients or prospects throughout a given week, whether it's through phone call, Zooms like this, whatever it might be. If I'm speaking at a conference, I talk to a lot more people. And when we think about 2025 and we think about where the industry's been and where it's headed, you know, I had Mike Cleland on the show earlier this year, and he was projecting, as ASA was, that we would come out of a 3-year decline as an industry. Was at Staffing World in October, and come to find out, they're projecting that we didn't come out of that decline, that we'll have another down year. And again, as I talk to and have the opportunity to sit down with owners and thought leaders and strategic thinkers in staffing and recruiting, I think Hell of a Year is a great way to summarize it. You know, it's been incredibly difficult to get orders. It's been incredibly difficult to have conversations with prospects. It's even difficult to have conversations with current customers. We know it's harder to get in front of candidates. But as somebody mentioned, business development, it's incredibly difficult to get in front of prospects and have strategic conversations with them. And what I hope for today is that we have the opportunity to sit down and think about some of the biggest lessons from 2025. You know, I'm fortunate enough at Haley to sit down and host this fantastic show called Take the Stage and Insights. And we've been doing it now for about 7 years. Take the Stage has just been around for 2 years now. And before I get to some of the tips and lessons that I've learned, let me tell you about the show in case you're not familiar with it. On Insights, I sit down with somebody from Haley Marketing, and we talk about what's working in digital and recruitment marketing. So whether it's somebody from our PPC team or SEO team, we talk very tactically, how can we drive more job orders and more applications with that specialty area? On Take the Stage, I sit down with a strategic thought leader, consultant, coach from staffing and recruiting, and talk specifically about one of their topics and have an open dialogue about that topic. Take the Stage fundamentally came to exist because I was flying to NAPS in Jacksonville a couple of years ago. And as I was flying and finalizing some prep work for one of my talks, I learned about the forgetting curve. And the forgetting curve tells us that just 1 hour learning new material, 50% of that is gone. Now, friends, I don't know about you, but I struggle with the thought of 50% of what you're about to learn being in 1 year and out the other by the time you drive home from work this afternoon, let alone what's going to happen 1 week from now, which means 90% of what you learn will be gone. So I talked to the team over here and I said, we need to challenge that. So let's bring conference caliber speakers, let's bring coaches, let's bring strategic thinkers and thought leaders to the show to bring those conference caliber talks and topics to the audience. And that's exactly what we do. So, you know who I am, you know who we are, you know what the show's all about. Let's get started. And one of my biggest takeaways from 2025 was a conversation with Tom Kosnick and David Cerns. It was the first session that we did on Take the Stage with 2 people. And I got to be honest, I was nervous to do it. I like sitting down and talking to one person because it's very easy to have a dialogue. And when you're orchestrating an interview or you're orchestrating a conversation and you're trying to make sure 2 people have a level playing field to air their conversation, it was difficult, but it was a lot of fun. And in pre-production, Tom Kosnick mentioned something that has stuck with me since. He said, Brad, the staffing industry is in the heart of a perfect storm. And when I asked him what he meant by that on the show, we went from pre-production to the show, he said that the staffing industry is being threatened left and right. We're not just getting beat up by price. We're not just getting beat up by competitors. We are being fundamentally threatened. And I pulled some quick notes from that show because I want to make sure I get it right. But when we think about the threats that are impacting the staffing and recruiting industry, these are specifically the things that David and Tom mentioned on the show. We have immigration's impact on the labor pool, or lack thereof immigration. We have nearshoring and offshoring. We have the rise of independent contractors and freelance platforms. We have manufacturing automation and other automations that are disrupting the level of work that people can do or the work that we don't need people to do. We have changing buying preferences of our clients. We have consumers preferring AI over recruiters. We have consumers preferring AI over human conversation. We're going to talk about that later. We have the expansion of VMS, wage inflation, and squeezed margins. We have AI driving industry transformation right now, more rapidly than ever before. We have more AI players entering the space and leaving the space, candidly, than ever before. We have an industry that is already a little resistant to change. That's a threat to the industry. We have high turnover of sales and recruiting teams. Maybe you've seen that on your team, maybe you haven't. But we also have weak manager development. We know that weak management means that other levels of employees are going to leave as well. And then we have tech fatigue and executive burnout. Friends, that is anywhere from 12 to 15 individual threats that are hitting this industry all at once. And if we're going to sit here and think that the industry is just going to go back to the way that it was before, maybe you need me here today to say that that's not going to happen. The industry is changing. The industry has changed. It's been drastically shaken up by these threats. And the best staffing and recruiting firms are understanding that we need to adapt, and we need to adapt now, because the industry is not going to go back to the way it was before. It is going to continue to pivot and evolve because of these threats. But the best staffing and recruiting firms are understanding very, very clearly that there is not only a storm approaching, but there is a storm upon us. And what I think the best leaders are doing right now, from the calls that I've had and the individuals I've been able to sit down with at conferences, the best leaders know there's a storm coming. I can see it. I can see the dark storm clouds coming. And they don't sit here and think, maybe it'll miss me. Maybe it'll pass. Maybe it'll dodge us just a little bit. They say, you know what? That storm's coming. And even if it does miss us a little bit, I'm still going to be proactive about it. I'm still going to plan accordingly, because even if it does hit me just a little bit, I want to be prepared. So when I sat down with Tom and David and we talked through these threats that are impacting the staffing and recruiting industry, it's also important that we not only understand that the storm is coming. Again, the rain clouds are approaching. You can see them out over the lake. We know it's going to get stormy. We don't want to sit here as leaders in the space and say, yeah, well, maybe the storm will pass, or maybe it'll miss us. Instead, we want to be proactive in saying, listen, if it hits us, here's what we're going to do about it. Here is our action plan, which is a fantastic conversation to have as we look at getting ready for 2026, a new year, a new start, right? But even if it just hits us just a little bit, here's how we're going to prepare. The next lesson I had, which is going to tie in really well to this, is that we need to adapt, and we need to adapt now. Consumers, consumers are not comparing you to other staffing and recruiting firms. They're comparing you to the biggest tech players that they interact with every single day. It's a lesson that Leah Taniguchi from Bullhorn shared with me a couple episodes ago, and I'm going to talk about her again in a little bit because she had many takeaways that I want to share on this recap, Lunch with Haley. But one really important note that she made is that Gen Z specifically, but consumers, we'll generalize it, are not comparing your staffing services or the service you provide to other staffing services. They're comparing it to players like Amazon, DoorDash, Spotify. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Amazon. I don't know about you. That truck shows up at my house every other day. And if I want to order something, in one click to open the app, one search for the product, one click, it can be at my house tomorrow. I think now it even says delivery by tomorrow morning. Speed. If I want to order the same product, and I've talked about this on the show before, let's say I want to order some sort of supplement or some sort of product direct from the brand, 5 to 7 days maybe, if it's got to go through the postal system. But tomorrow, if I go through Amazon, speed. Let's talk about Spotify. Specifically, I use Amazon Music. So for me, I'm going to talk about Amazon Music, but I know Spotify does the same thing. With Maestro, I can go into Amazon Music and I can say, I want a running playlist that is only upbeat music from bands like Panic at the Disco, Boys Like Girls, and Mayday Parade. Only upbeat music because I'm getting ready for a run. And from there, I get a perfectly curated list of music ready for my run. Or if I'm doing some deep thought because I'm getting ready for a show, I could say I only want calm music from country artists. Mellow me out. And I get a perfectly curated list. And then we have DoorDash. With DoorDash, I can order something like Chipotle. I order way too much DoorDash, by the way. Something like Chipotle. And I know exactly when it's being made, when it's picked up. I know what red light it's at. I know when it's turning onto my street. I know the exact turn-by-turn navigation of when that burrito bowl is going to show up at my doorstep. And then I get a picture when it is at my doorstep so that I can go and get it. Transparency. I want you to think about your application process. I want you to think about your prospecting process, your sales process. Do you have transparency, speed, and a curation system that speaks to the candidate or the prospect? Friends, if I can order Chipotle and I can know exactly where that bowl is with turn-by-turn navigation, what red light it's at, when it's going to be on my street, why can't an applicant know where they're at in the application process? Why is there still a resume black hole? If my burrito bowl can tell me that it is 2 red lights away. What are we doing with jobs? On your job board, on your career portal, on your website, can you filter by specific categories? Can you have a curated list of jobs based on marketing roles in Buffalo, New York specifically? Or are you expecting candidates to sort of weed through the roles that don't apply to them? And then the last, speed. How fast are you getting back to somebody? Amazon, I've said many times on this show, has a funny way of screwing things up for all of us. Speed wins. And if you're not getting back to people fast with the right answer at the right time, how they want to be communicated with, they're moving somewhere else. And that Amazon delivery is a perfect example to it. But again, candidates and prospects are not comparing our services to other staffing firms. They're not saying, oh, well, Brad's staffing firm's okay because they're a little bit better than Rachel's staffing firm. They're looking at the experience that they can have and they're emulating that. They're bringing that to your firm. Even though those companies are outside of staffing and recruiting, they expect that level of technology. They expect that level of service. It was a fantastic takeaway from the year. And as I sit here and I reflect on it, I want to challenge you to think about what that means for you and your business going into 2026. What can you learn from some of these other massive players in the space? And I'm not saying you need to create a tech stack that rivals DoorDash. We simply cannot do that. But who might we partner with? Or what processes can we put in place to be just a little bit faster, a little bit more transparent, and a little bit more agile and have that curated experience for candidates and customers? Magezi, I appreciate you. I see Magezi's in the chat dropping links to each specific episode as they come up. I really do appreciate that. If you see anything or you hear anything here, you have questions, feel free to use that chat window. That's why we got started with it at the beginning. Otherwise, I'm going to continue through with some of my lessons learned. Probably I will say my biggest lesson learned, and I actually just shared this on a call today. I was talking to somebody and ahead of the call, or right at the end of the call, I was encouraging them to come to the webinar, and they said, well, what's your biggest takeaway so that I don't have to come? It was, a little joke about it. And I said, and I stopped and I said, my biggest takeaway was the conversation I had with Declan Edwards about how we all have to stop chasing happiness. And friends, I want you to go on a little journey with me, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story here. If you watch the show or you subscribe to any of the content that I put out, I ran the Buffalo Marathon this last May, my first marathon. 4:34:19, the official time, a time I'm incredibly proud of. Still running, still super active, thinking about Buffalo in 2026. Haven't signed up yet, but really thinking about it. Did a couple halves in the fall, but that's not the point. The point was I signed up for the Buffalo Marathon last June. So we'll call it 11 months of training, almost 1 full year of training and prep. Diet, recovery, miles every week, speed workouts, long runs, short runs, stretching, PT, obsessing over things like resting heart rate and recovery scores, and obsessing, I wear a Whoop band, looking at all of that data so that I could put the best version of myself on the start line Memorial Day weekend of 2025. Completed the race, excited, proud. And then I woke up the next morning feeling like a part of me was missing. I was ready to go run more miles. I was ready and felt like I owed myself more training, more prep, more nutrition. You know, the blisters on my feet were just starting. It's not even like we were getting ready for a recovery process. We were still very much in it a day later. And mentally, I was thinking, well, you know, you owe yourself a 5-mile easy run today of prep. 3 days later, I sit down with Declan Edwards, who is a happiness researcher out of the UK. Fantastic conversation. One of my favorite conversations from the year, and one that I hope and wish everybody watches before 2026, about how we have to stop chasing happiness. And I remember sitting down with Declan, and, you know, every show is for the listener, but they're very much for me as well. And I think that's why Take the Stage and Insights work so well, is because I lead with general curiosity. And I remember sitting there and looking at Declan, and I said one very blunt question. And I said, Declan, why is it so hard for us to sit in our success and sit in our happiness? Why is it so hard to just sit in our success? And we had a fantastic conversation about the hedonic treadmill and the happiness trap. And the happiness trap and the hedonic treadmill tell us that when we're on it, you're constantly living in this phase of, I'll be happy when I get that promotion, when I make X dollars, when I complete the marathon, when I do the thing I set out to do. That's when I'll be happy. But then we get there and we realize not a heck of a lot has changed. In fact, a lot of it's still the exact same. And the happiness doesn't come from actually doing the thing. The happiness comes from creating the systems and the habits and the repeatable processes that got us to the point where we could do the thing. And what I loved about this conversation, one, Declan's a fantastic person. And two, it challenged me to start thinking a little bit differently about how I see happiness. We cannot chase happiness. Happiness is not something that is at the end of a destination. We don't ultimately reach happiness. We learn to sort of live in our happiness or live in the current state that we're in. But it's a difficult place to be. And that's why I love the conversation with Declan, is because we need to stop this chase of I'll be happy when, and understand that instead, if we can just sort of exist and function and know, listen, we're doing a pretty darn good job. I think that's the lesson that a lot of staffing owners need to hear. That it's not that we'll necessarily be happy when we make another million or when we place X more candidates or when we hit this goal. We're happy because of the process. We're happy because of the new systems we're putting in place, because of the candidates that we're placing day after day. It's not about the goal of placing 100. Let's be happy that we're placing one today, that we're placing one right now, that we're giving somebody the opportunity to elevate their career, elevate their livelihood, that we can work with one new client or have the opportunity to coach or consult with one new potential prospect. That helps us get off that happiness trap and get off that hedonic treadmill. John Raffini in the chat. It's about the journey. John, good to see you, bud. Glad to have you here. John's got a quote, and John, I don't have you in here because I talked to you back in 2024, I believe, so you didn't make the cut in terms of takeaways from 2025. But John, since you're in the chat, I will say I love your mentality of plan your work and work your plan. And I'll give you a shout out for that because I see that on LinkedIn all the time. I think when you have a plan and you plan your work and you work your plan, it helps you achieve really good success. And we're going to talk about that in 1 second. My next big takeaway from the year, topical authority. We have Sean Shinaki on our team, our SEO team. And if I hear the phrase topical authority one more time, I told him, I don't know what I'm going to do. But Sean has ingrained in our entire team that it is about topical authority more than anything when it comes to ongoing SEO or AI as we're calling it over here at Haley Marketing. When we think about topical authority is giving your website, giving the entity that is your brand or your website, your domain, basically sending all of the ranking signals that you need to sites like Google or Bing or ChatGPT even, that you can do the things that you think you can do. And topical authority might look like if you are a world-class staffing provider of nursing services in Buffalo, New York, having multiple pages about every service line that you can support as it relates to nursing services in Buffalo, New York. But having that topical authority that is so laser focused on what it is that you do, who you service, who you support, and specifically where you do the thing that you say you do on your website. It's not enough to just have a one-page brochure anymore. We need to have that consistent topical authority to give ourselves more signed cards in the deck of 52. That's the analogy that I paint all the time. When we think about SEO, sure, you can sign one card, shove it in the deck of 52, shuffle them up, and have the likelihood of pulling your card. But the odds change if you sign 3 or 4 more cards and shove them back in. 5 or 6 more, shove them back in. The more pages you have on your website, the more dense your website becomes with that topical authority, again, that says you do the things that you know you do day after day, the more likely you are to show up in organic search or ChatGPT or other key AI platforms. So, had to give Sean a shout out. I told him I would be very mistaken if I didn't give him a shout out on this episode of Lunch with Haley, because I've heard the phrase topical authority no fewer than 1,000 times here. We had a fantastic episode on it. If you want to learn more about SEO specifically, Sean's your guy. We have a fantastic SEO team over here as well. But that episode I can name specifically will help you get started and get you on your way. Let's talk about my friends over at the Colorado Staffing Association. If you'll go on another journey with me for one of my biggest takeaways from 2025, it's that we should prioritize systems, not goals. It's a lesson from James Clear, and it's also a lesson that was repeated back to me by Keely Flood on an episode of Take the Stage. So where does this relate to my friends at the Colorado Staffing Association? I spoke at CSA this last fall for, I think it was my 7th time out that way. Some of my favorite people in the industry are in that association. If you are, and I'll give them a plug right now, if you are a Colorado-based staffing agency and you're not affiliated with them, I would encourage you to reach out and get a hold of them and learn a little bit more about them. Fantastic people. Have given me a great opportunity to speak there and get to know them very, very well. But the story goes a little something like this. So I had an early flight. And typically when you go West Coast to East Coast, you need to have an early flight to get out at a reasonable time. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I like to get back as soon as I can. I don't like to have a long travel day if I have a travel day, right? If you're leaving after a conference, you leave when it's done. But if you have to leave the next day, I try to get out as early as possible. So I had like a 5:30 Uber, maybe 5 a.m. Uber, something like that. I'm in the back of the car, minding my own business. I don't think Uber drivers talk anymore, by the way. I've been in multiple cars this year. They just sit there and drive, which is fine. I have things to do anyways, but that's besides the point. I guess that's another lesson learned. But I'm sitting in the back, scrolling TikTok, scrolling Instagram, Twitter, like I normally do, drinking a coffee, minding my own business, looking out the window. And a quote from James Clear pops up on my phone. It says, "People that want to win once set a goal. People that want to win repeatedly create a system." Punched me in the face. So much so that I remember starting to write an article for our Smart Ideas newsletter in the back of that Uber. I finished it on the plane. I think I published it first on my LinkedIn, and then I emailed it to David Cerns, our co-CEO, and I said, listen, I think this would be a good article for Smart Ideas. David loved it. I think our team cleaned it up maybe a little bit. Again, I typed it on an iPhone, and we published it for Smart Ideas. But if you want to win once, you set a goal, and if you want to win repeatedly, you set a system. It's funny because 2 or 3 days later, I get home and I'm talking to Keely Flood about setting systems, creating systems, and not necessarily setting goals, but creating the systems that fuel that goal. And why this was such a profound impact on me this year is I, for the longest time, have talked about how we need to create marketing goals. We need to know the destination. I've even have talks at Haley Marketing. The roadmap to social media success paints the analogy to a road trip. If the goal is to get your entire family to Ocean City, Maryland, how are you going to do it? What's the strategy? What are the tactics? Let's say you and your extended family want to get to Disney World. And that's all you tell people. Hey, we're all going to Disney World. The likelihood that everyone shows up at the same place, at the same time, on the same day, with the right stuff, at the same resort, slim to none. But you set the goal. You say, okay, we're going to fly on Southwest. We're going to get there at 9 a.m. We're going to stay at this resort. We're going to have 4-day passes. You create the picture, the goal, right? That's how I've always painted marketing. We set this sort of end destination, and then from there, we reverse engineer it. We create strategies and tactics. That's great. We want to have goals, and I'm not here to say we shouldn't have a goal, right? We want to lose 10 pounds. That's a goal. We want to run a marathon. Great. That's a goal. But the system enables the goal, and the system creates the repeatable habits so that we can complete the goal again. I want to say that again. Goals are fine and goals are great, but systems enable the goal, and systems also make it so that it can be repeatable. We don't just want to win once. In the case of the people that were in the chat earlier saying that business development was one of their biggest challenges of 2025, landing one client before the end of the year would be fantastic. And I hope that happens for you. But the goal should not be to just land one client. It should be to create the sales system, the marketing system, the sales outreach cadence, the marketing cadence, and the marketing air support that fuels that sales support, that fuels that sales effort, so that yes, you close in December, but you also create a system where you can close again in January repeatedly, February repeatedly. And even if you don't close in January, we're still marching forward to close in February, March, April. We don't want to just create a goal because, again, that has a finite destination. We instead want to create the system that allows us and enables us the opportunity to have repeatable success. Let's talk about marketing automation. I had Rachel Reed from our team on Insights earlier this year, and we talked specifically about marketing automation. And friends, to me, when I think about the biggest takeaways from 2025, and this has become a huge talking point for me as I look at the talks that I've delivered at different state associations. I even delivered this at Staffing World this year when I stood on stage, and I said very clearly, you are not reaching your prospects enough. Plain and simple. We know it takes 17 to 20 touches for someone to fundamentally know your company exists. At Staffing World, somebody on stage said that number is 50 touches. I've also heard from another roundtable that it takes 70 touches for someone just to fundamentally know you exist. That's not to get the conversation. That's not to get the order. That's just to know that Brad's Widget Company is on this planet. Let's, for sake of this conversation, take the low end of that. Let's eliminate the big scary number and instead say it takes 17 to 20 touches. We also know that 90% of sales reps give up at the 4th attempt. Now, you're on lunch with Haley, or you're watching the recording of this, which means you're an educated individual, and you know in your heart, 4 is not 17. Therefore, when we say we can't close, when we say that we're not getting the conversation, it's a raw mathematics number. We're not putting in the reps. We're not putting in the work to enable our prospect to even know who we are. Not even to differentiate ourselves across others, but just from a raw visibility standpoint, we're not getting in front of enough people so we can have enough at-bats to earn the conversation. That, to me, is where marketing automation comes into play. Marketing automation should be running alongside your sales efforts, providing air cover, but strategic air cover for your sales efforts. So that we're not just sending a one-off newsletter or some sort of seasonal, Happy Holidays, Merry Christmas type of e-card, though I think there is value in doing those. I'm not saying don't do that. I think we're doing that in conjunction with marketing automation. But I am a huge proponent and a huge advocate for marketing automation in the sense of I want to look at who my key prospects are. I want to drip them with a 12 to 16 touch campaign. But I also want to be strategic with that. And I don't just want to send a sequential cadence. Here's email 1, here's email 2, here's email 3, regardless of what they do at the top of the funnel. I want automations to occur based on activities. So if people are looking at different pages, they get dripped with different automations. If they open an email versus if they don't open an email, they get dripped with different automations. If we actually have a conversation with them, they enter a different track. Strategic email, strategic communication, to me, is game-changing in the sense of it's not just sending a one-off, hey, email or sequential email, but instead it's strategic automations. It's even better if we can personalize that automation. I tell a story quite frequently, and I should have alluded to this before, but I'm hoping to bring as many stories as possible to this conversation. But I've told a story on the show multiple times about GNC. I don't shop at GNC too much anymore because I'm very loyal to a couple other products that I like right now. But a little while ago, I got a postcard in the mail from GNC. And when I opened it, because it was a bifold, so it was two, right? You open it, and on the inside, the exact protein powder, down to the flavor that I bought the month prior, looking right at me with a comeback for $5 off. One, they know it's a 30-serving bottle, so it's sent to me, 25 days after I purchase because they know you're going to need more. Two, personalized automation. They automate the delivery of that to me based on the purchase, but then it's personalized in the small instance of that is my product. It's my product looking at me. Now, I'm triggered emotionally to go back and buy what I'm already using today, and I'm going to do it with them. So when we think about having the right automations, having that personalized automation takes it just one step further. Let's talk about my buddy Dan Fisher over at the Menemsha Group. This episode, when I look at the data of the podcast, and I guess we could call a vodcast, the video element of the podcast, Dan's episode has the best numbers from the year. Maybe it's because we titled it "Stop Selling Like the 80s." And what's interesting is he very directly said our industry needs to stop selling like the 1980s. And it's interesting as we go out and I have the opportunity to talk to, quite frankly, hundreds of individuals in the staffing and recruiting industry every year. And I'm very grateful for that. Our sales practices, for the most part, are very outdated. We're still cold calling. We're still pounding the phones. We're still smiling and dialing. We're still doing drop buys the same way we used to. And we're selling like the 80s. And I think I pulled a note here that I wanted to say specifically about Dan. I did. Dan said the cold outreach in staffing is stuck decades behind. And basically, the long story short of it is that consumers have evolved in terms of how they want to be sold to. Buyer expectations have evolved based on how buyers want to be sold to, especially when we think about SaaS brands or we think about B2B industries, direct to consumer, how people want to be sold to or how they want to be not sold to while still being sold to has changed. But we still sell very transactionally. We still sell based on scripts. We still sell based on what's in it for me. We still sell very much based on it, what's in it for us. We need to stop selling like the 80s. And I would encourage you to listen to that episode specifically to hear Dan's fantastic feedback and tips on how we can do that. Another thing that he had talked about is we need to disarm the prospect when cold calling. We need to make sure that we say something or we interrupt sort of their psychological wavelength because they already know they want to hang up on us. So what can we do? How can we structure how we're going to initiate the conversation so we disarm the prospect, not disrupt, disarm the prospect right from the start? But we need to stop selling like the 80s. Consumer behavior has changed. How we buy has changed. No one wants to directly be sold to anymore. That I don't think has changed, but it's true. So then we need to think about our sales process. And that's not to say, okay, don't cold call, don't send cold email. That's not what I'm saying at all. But how you're doing it, the systems you're deploying, the message that you're sending, how you are using curiosity, which I'm going to talk about soon, instead of a script, changes the entire dialogue of the sales process. Again, we're not selling transactionally if we're leading with curiosity, if we're selling like in I hate to say in modern ways, but if we're selling in ways that direct to consumer goods are selling, it changes the conversation. It changes how we're selling. And we need to have the courage to adapt to do so. Talking about adapting and talking about staying curious, another one of my favorite episodes from the year is with, I'm going to call him a good buddy of mine now, Casey Jaycox. Casey, he's a goof. I got to be honest. I don't know if he's on the show today. I'll send him that clip afterwards because he knows it too. I've had the opportunity now, so I've ran the show for 7 years. Take the Stage we've done for 2 years. So I've interviewed and talked to dozens of individuals. I want to say hundreds. It's probably not that high because Team Haley repeats. On Take the Stage, we've only repeated guests once, and that's Tom Kosnick. So you're talking at least 70 different guests on Take the Stage. Casey is the only guest where he and I went back and forth with Anchorman and Superbad and Hangover quotes for a majority of the show. Just a good, honest guy and a good conversation. One thing that I love about Casey, though, is his ability to stay curious. And when I first met Casey, he came as a referral from Haley Berkner on our team. She saw him speak at another industry conference, and she said, you got to learn who Casey is and you got to talk to him. And I sat down and I talked to Casey, and he signed his email, Stay Curious. And first off, that struck me. But then we started talking, and I learned that that's really his whole sales mentality and sales methodology, is just always stay curious and stay present in the conversation. And I think we lose that in sales, especially when we're going in an industry that's down for its 4th year. We need the sale now. And I get that. Right. I had Mark Whitby on the show too this year, and we talked about his feast or famine cycles. And that's exactly what the industry does. When things are good, they're really good and we're eating well. But there's also times where there's famine and we can't get orders and we can't close. And I know how hard it is for sales reps when you can't close and you're living on commission checks and you have bills to pay. And not only bills to pay, but you want to go on vacation and you're trying to find the funds to do all of that. I get it. So we revert back to selling like the 80s. Getting transactional with it, trying to push the sale, trying to close the sale, trying to do everything we can to nudge it forward. But if instead we stayed curious and we asked the right questions, we can guide the prospect on the right path. We can guide the prospect down whether or not they do want to do business with us or not. Casey also advocates for winning the relationship, not the deal. And that's something that I've subscribed to wholeheartedly since my conversation with Casey. Win the relationship, not the deal. That's system-oriented, not goal-oriented. That ties in the conversation beautifully with Keely Flood. If we want to win the deal, that's the goal, right? And I had, I just talked to John Klimshin, published that episode last week, another phenomenal episode that I actually wasn't planning on referencing today. But he made a funny comment that winning the deal's cool, he said. He said, winning the deal's cool. You know, getting paid, that's fun. But he said the thrill's in the hunt. The thrill's in the chase. The thrill is staying curious and trying to do it again. And when we think about winning the relationship, not the deal, again, the deal becomes the goal. But everyone can win once. We want to win repeatedly. And when you win a relationship, and you can drive repeat business from people that are no longer customers, but they're friends, that changes things. That drastically changes things. Oh, we're sitting here and we're thinking about, okay, well, how am I going to get business in January? Oh, I'll just call my buddy Brad and see if he needs, some help. That changes the conversation. If we can get a cup of coffee and we can talk about staffing needs instead of you trying to cold sell me because you're dropping by the office and I don't know who you are, that changes things. So a couple key takeaways there from Casey. And again, great guy. I got to catch up with him soon. But his whole methodology of staying curious and winning the relationship, not the deal, is, again, one of my biggest takeaways from the year. I am just now realizing we're at 2:42. We're pretty darn close to 3 o'clock, friends, Eastern. If I'm a few minutes late, I hope you stick with me. I'm pretty good at wrapping things up and staying on task here. But just in case you have a 3 o'clock call, I do want to share that we are recording everything. It might take a couple days later than usual. Typically, we bounce right out of Zoom, and Magezi from our team goes right to YouTube with it. Because we're recording like we do the podcast, we got to get some other production players in play here. So we're going to load the episode up to YouTube in crispy 4K once we have that, and we have our team run through it too and add some lower thirds and clean it up for us. So if you have to dip early, totally get it. This will be on YouTube for you in the near future, but I do hope that you stick with me for a little bit longer. The next takeaway comes from a personal trip I took to Las Vegas with my wife, and a steak that I had in Las Vegas. So Rachel and I, we went to Las Vegas in October for the When We Were Young festival. We are emo kids and sad kids at heart. We love emo music, and Blink-182 and Panic at the Disco were headlining this year. We knew we wanted to go, so we bought tickets. And ahead of the show, we also are huge fans of Gordon Ramsay cooking shows. Love cooking shows. So we knew we were going to be in Vegas, and I said, all right, we're going to be there. I want to go get the Wellington from Hell's Kitchen. If we're going to be there, this is my 4th time to Vegas. I've eaten at a bunch of great places. Never been. And because Hell's Kitchen is such a good show and we watch it every season, I got to go get the Wellington. So we paid for these tickets probably in January, I think is when day 2 opened up. The concert was in October, so 10 months of just sitting and thinking about the show, thinking about the Wellington. Friends, so much so that when I got there, I didn't even look at the menu. I knew exactly what I wanted. Again, the Wellington. We've been thinking about it for 10 months. It came out, and I got to tell you, I was completely underwhelmed. It was overhyped, and it was just an average meal. Now, the experience was great. We had, a window seat right on the strip. The waiters were great. The waitresses were great. The drinks were great. Dessert was phenomenal. But the Wellington itself, very average. And what does that mean for your staffing and recruiting firm? It means that the marketing cannot perform better than the actual service delivery. Your marketing, your messaging, your promise to prospects, to candidates, cannot outperform the actual service delivery. When a candidate or a prospect actually has the opportunity to work with you, when they finally sign the dotted line or they finally submit their application and they get the chance to work with you, they don't have to work with you. They get the chance to work with you. When they get the chance to work with you, the level of service delivery has to wow them as good as the marketing that got them in the door. Otherwise, they're going to go somewhere else. Now, for someone like me, who might go to Vegas again if, a conference brings me out that way, maybe 10 years from now with my wife again, I'd rather go somewhere else on a vacation. If I'm being honest, I've already been there. Let's do something else. I actually think Alaska is in the pipeline for 2026, which is pretty cool. But for that, they did their job. They got me in the door. They don't necessarily care if I come back because when am I going to go to Vegas again? But for something like a staffing provider, a plumber, a service industry, we want repeat business. So we want a level of experience, candidate or client experience, that wants people to come back, that wants people to rave about it, that doesn't want to create a situation where somebody like myself is on a webinar or a podcast recording talking about how they wished it would have been better. So again, friends, when we think about living up to the hype, as we look at everything that you're deploying in 2026, whether it's recruitment marketing or your sales system, we need to make sure that it lives up to the hype when it actually gets down to candidate and client experience, because that's what gets people back. Marketing might get people in the door. You might get your MQLs or SQLs down the funnel, but how you make people feel brings them back. Let's talk about Rochelle Carrington. I had Rochelle on early in the year, and I actually think her and I should chat again. I think we could just continue the conversation that we had already because it was a phenomenal conversation. But her whole angle for the conversation, there are multiple points, but my biggest takeaway is that we need to stop chasing prospects. We need to stop acting desperate, sounding desperate, in chasing prospects. We should instead get people to a point where they're ready to give us a decision. Is now the right time, yes or no? We want to make sure that we are leveling the playing field to have a strong communicative conversation with somebody, and we're not pushing what it is that we're trying to sell. And then we need to stop chasing. We need to stop the constant hustle and the sales mentality of chasing prospects. That turns people off. She also had a fantastic analogy that I hadn't heard before. I know she mentioned it on our Smart Ideas 5 summit this past year as well, of sort of categorizing your prospects by squirrels, deer, and elephants. Your squirrels are your smaller clients, the smaller prospects. Maybe you get light business from them every now and again, but they're small, easy closes. Repeat business, small, easy closes. Then you have those deer. It sounds like a weird analogy when I'm saying it. I'm sure Rochelle paints it a lot better. I know she paints it a lot better. But deer, you have a little bit of a bigger win, right? It's a bigger close, takes more work to get a deer. And then you have an elephant. Elephants take some time. They're big clients. They're worth a lot more. They take a long time to close. You want to have all of them in your pipeline, though, because you don't know when you're going to close the elephant. You don't know when you're going to close the squirrels, and you don't know when you're going to close the deer. But if you have enough in the pipeline where you have those quick hits that you can close, you have those sort of medium hits that you can close, then you have those big ones that you get every now and again, maybe more if you have the repeatable system in place. You want to have different levels of prospects and different levels of business that you could be closing. So again, one of my biggest takeaways there is just the mentality of educating your team to categorize the individuals that you're working with and prospects that you're working with. And maybe one of my last takeaways before I get to something personal for you, conversation I had with Leah Taniguchi, one of the senior researchers from Bullhorn. They put out their Grid 2025 report, and I had Leah on the show to break down some of the data from the report and also data that didn't make the report. And a couple key findings that absolutely stopped me in my tracks. One data point that Bullhorn found is that 88% of individuals let me back up. I was going to go into a reputation management stat because I've said it so many times. 3, 2, 1. 88% of individuals that were surveyed in their Grid report said that talking to a voice agent, an AI voice agent, was as good as or better than working with a recruiter. Let me say that again. 88% of individuals that filled out their survey, the Grid 2025 report, said that working with a voice agent was as good as or better than working with a recruiter. Friends, I don't know about you. I didn't think we were there yet, though. I don't work with many voice agents. Maybe I do and I don't know it. But I didn't think that AI and voice agents were ready to completely disrupt conversation. Now, where I think AI voice agents could come into play in the screening process is asking really, really good questions, right? If you're screening candidates and you have a voice agent that is so laser focused in everything it is to know about, marketing strategists. So when you're looking for marketing strategists, it knows what questions to ask, more so what follow-up questions to ask. Sounds like a great use case. But the shocking point that came up of 88% of people, again, that filled out the survey, their Grid report, said that talking to a voice agent was as good as or better than working with a recruiter. Absolutely shocked me. On top of that, she had mentioned that satisfaction with recruiters and staffing firms for Gen Z is down in every single measurable area when working with staffing and recruiting firms. Again, these are people that have worked with staffing and recruiting firms in the past. They filled out the survey. Satisfaction is down across the board. Gen Z, presumably a demographic that's going to be in the workforce for a very long time, given their age and their demo, because they're a Gen Z, should be a demographic that we want to make extremely satisfied in working with us. But we find from that research that they're incredibly dissatisfied with staffing and recruiting firms. And why? Well, that demographic wants a white glove approach. They want customized experiences. They want to feel heard. They want to know that their voice matters. They want to know that they're being listened to. And when we think about, I'll say stereotypical staffing and recruiting firms, I'm not talking about your firm specifically, but typically when a candidate applies, resume goes into a black hole. When do I hear back? I don't know. Okay, that's already check one. Maybe I fill out a survey, not a survey, but a contact form. Maybe it's slow to get back to me. Do I have a chatbot or do I have a voice agent that I can call when I want to call? If speed's going to win, Gen Z is putting our staffing firms against DoorDash, Amazon, and Spotify, not other staffing firms. They're thinking about the technology that they're using daily in their smartphones, and they're comparing you and your technology to that. So when we think about our level of service as we go into 2026, I would challenge you to go through your application process. Go through your prospecting process. What does that look like? Can you fill out a job application on your website? Is it easy? Is it fun? How long does it take one of your team members to get back to somebody that applies? Secret shop yourself. Have a friend or a family member put in an application under an alias, right? Have a spouse do it. Have a child do it, one of your kids. Send in a request through a contact form. How long does it take for somebody to get back to them? And not just the automated, thanks for reaching out, but an actual reply. I'll never forget, I was working with a client a few years ago, and I still tell this story all the time when I'm on stage. I've said it on the show a bunch of times too. I will never forget somebody that said, Brad, I don't think any of the marketing you're doing is working anymore because we're not getting any leads. They've completely dried up. I haven't seen a lead come through in months. Before even thinking, okay, well, what's broken on the marketing side of things, we looked at the form itself. And the form and the leads were going to an inbox that was completely shut off because the person had quit and they didn't reroute it to anybody else. So everyone that was filling out the contact form was going nowhere. Do you know where your leads are going? If somebody fills out a contact form, do you know what's happening? Do you know your requested employee or your request service, requested consultation? Where do those forms route to? What happens if a form comes in at 5:01 after your team closes the laptop? How long does it take for somebody to get back? Does the auto prompt that I get in my email say, listen, our working responding hours end at 5. We'll get back to you at 8:01 when we punch in or when we clock in. I guess no one's really punching a time clock anymore. Maybe you are. What does that experience look like? Our first episode of Insights, back when Todd Lewandowski was still hosting the show at Haley Marketing, we had Jennifer Lambert on the show. And she talked about how we have to create that cherry on top of the ice cream sundae experience. When you get an ice cream sundae from a ice cream shop, I'm talking like my 3-year-old, an ice cream shop, and they bring out the ice cream sundae, it's great as is. Ice cream sundae, banana split, whatever it is. It's great as it is. But then they reach into the container to get out the cherry. They drop it on top. And it takes it to that wow status. That wow, you didn't have to do that for me. It was fine just the way it was. You didn't have to do that. Are we doing that for our candidates and our clients? If satisfaction is down across a survey of 2,800 candidates that have worked with staffing and recruiting firms in the past, we're seeing satisfaction is going down. What can we do to say, listen, we're going to change that today? How do we change our processes today? It's been a fun year. I got to be honest. I love this show. I'm fortunate enough to come to this studio probably once a week, every other week. Sometimes we batch them and I get to do a bunch in one week. Those are some of the best weeks that I have. I love sitting down and talking to people on the team to learn what's working in digital and recruitment marketing. I love sitting down with industry thought leaders so that they can share their insights with our listeners. I love staying curious and trying to ask the right questions so that I can learn myself while also educating you, the listeners. So ultimately it's for you. Even though if you listen to the show, I end with 2 questions. One book that's fundamentally changed your life, and one piece of advice that you would give to somebody just starting in staffing and recruiting. For 2 years now, have told you that that question of one book that's fundamentally changed your life is for you. It's really for me so I can grow my library. Sure, you get some residual effect from that too, but I'll be honest, I'm just trying to build my own library myself. It's a little win-win. I love this show. And if you enjoyed any part of today's Lunch with Haley, you've enjoyed any part of the key takeaways that I found from 2025, I hope that you'll take just 10 seconds after this before you get up and refill your coffee, your water, before you close your laptop for the day. Go to your preferred podcast player, whether that's Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, whatever it might be. Search for Secrets of Staffing Success and click subscribe. You'll get both shows by doing so. Or if you'd rather watch it, because we do invest heavily in production value and we try to bring our best visual selves to the show as well, you can go to YouTube, search for Haley Marketing and click subscribe there as well. And you'll get every episode as it drops on Monday morning. But again, those are my biggest takeaways from 2025. I want to thank the marketing team for giving me the runway to share these ideas with you. I've wanted to do this for a while now. I've wanted to just sit in front of a microphone and sort of recap the year. We've done recap shows before where we've done what we call clip shows, where we take sort of the best highlight clips from a show or the podcast and we run it back on Lunch with Haley. I don't love those. I think they're valuable on audio or video, but to do it on Lunch with Haley didn't feel right. We are actually, just to kind of talk about the show for a second, we are going to run, I believe, 2 clip shows. We're actually talking about that as a team today. I've broken down and we've broken down key moments from every single episode this year. So like the best 5 to 8 minutes of each episode, those are going to run out to close out December to kind of give our production team a time off and our video editors some time off and our audio guys some time off, not working on the show through the holiday season. But again, if you've had fun throughout this Lunch with Haley, I hope you'll subscribe to the show. I hope you come back and listen to a couple episodes so you can learn more from some fantastic people as we continue to take the stage and we share our insights with you. Happy holidays and be good to each other.